YouTube!
Why do this? In all seriousness, all shit talk aside, why do this? Why say, hey YouTube? I say hello ladies and gentlemen at the beginning of a lot of my videos because this is how one starts a speech, a discussion, a presentation. Hey YouTube is not how anyone starts anything ever. It's not how anything has ever been begun before YouTube. You're not even speaking to your audience, you're speaking to an inanimate object that seems in your head to represent your audience. You're a weird one, aren't you?
Today we'll be talking about race.
Nope, you know what? No, I'm so fucking sick of it. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. You can't make me. You cannot make me.
Hagbot, come back.
No, there is absolutely no way that you can convince me to come back over there. I have done too many of these.
It's a white girl this time. It could be different.
Alright, fine. I suppose it can't possibly be as bad as fucking another black nationalist or whatever. Wait, did you just pts me? I think I just got catcalled.
As Julie Andrews would say, let's start from the very beginning.
Starting from the beginning is indeed usually best practice. Go on.
Now, race is defined as a group of people identified as distinct from other groups because of supposed shared physical or genetic characteristics.
Note the supposed in there. This is someone that believes that race is wholly a social construct. Which is ridiculous, really.
Now, these characteristics can include skin color, bone structure, hair color, or eye color.
Also, disease likelihood, and a litany of other things that any geneticist or doctor could tell you.
It's a social rather than biological category.
Except that it is for sure a biological category that can be traced through the genome.
And it's one of the ways that we read each other's bodies and ascribe meaning to them.
I have a feeling this person also thinks that gender is 100% a social construct.
So, what does this mean?
Nothing. It never means anything, but sometimes it's fun to watch.
First of all, when we say that race is a social rather than scientific category, we mean that race is something that is socially constructed rather than biologically based.
Yes, of course it does, because something that can be socially induced or can be socially ascribed is automatically a social construct. It has no basis in reality. It's not something that exists that can be picked up and wielded like a weapon. No. It's definitely not a real thing. It was made up by these societies. It wasn't used by these societies. It wasn't something that already was, that was then used for nefarious purposes.
Come again? Basically, social construction is the way in which society groups and categorizes different things. It's the way in which we create meaning about different individuals, groups, or ideas through social or cultural practice.
How does one go from making the statement that social construction is simply the categorization to it is ascribing meaning to these things? You can simply say that there is such a thing as a black person without ascribing meaning to what it is to be a black person. You can say there is such a thing as a Caucasian person without knowing what it is to be a Caucasian purpose or ascribing it some meaning. Why are you guys such fucking bigots?
Or in other words, how we create meaning through our interactions with others. A good example of social construction would be the way in which we associate pink with girls and blue with boys.
Yeah, would you like to have a discussion about why we ascribe pink to women is because feminists wanted it that way? Because pink was once seen as a masculine color. No, you don't want to talk about the hand you've already served in social construction. You want to act as though you've only been acted upon.
Now, pink and blue as colors themselves don't really say much, but they have meaning because we give them meaning.
This is true of everything. This is true of words. This is true of absolutely everything that we value in the entire world, aside from oxygen, water, and caloric intake.
These colors only have these associations because we agree and perpetuate that they do.
Once you realize that, you realize that these people will be comfortable getting rid of absolutely everything as a social construct. Anything that bothers them, anything that isn't working in their favor, you can easily dismiss it by saying it's a social construct. They're not wrong. It is. By their definition and by the perception of reality. It is a social construct. So what? Almost everything is that value upon which we have placed it. That is all. Almost everything that we hold dear operates that way. Does that mean that we shouldn't hold anything dear? That we shouldn't have principles or values? That we shouldn't have value systems? Exactly what are you trying for here?
You'll hear this term a lot in sociology or when talking about concepts like race and gender.
Yes, you will hear this slippery term anywhere you find these con artists.
Yeah, Kaylee, I have a question. How can race be socially constructed when people clearly look different?
Luckily, science isn't based on how people fucking look.
Great question, YouTube.
I didn't ask a question, and I'm fairly certain YouTube, the website, doesn't give a fuck about you or your videos.
Well, it's true that different physical characteristics traditionally associated with different groups of people, skin color for example.
Sure, choose the most arbitrary and easily passed trait, but go on.
Are determined by genetics. There's no one race gene that delineates racial categories.
You are correct. There are, however, 3 race genomes that can determine your ancestral origins.
Come again? The genes determining skin color are no different than the genes that determine your eye color or your height, or whether or not you can curl your tongue or flare your nostrils.
How about those other ones you talked about before? The eye shape, the nostril openings, the skull shape, the distribution of certain disease potentialities, up to and including the increased skin cancer for whites, while the increased chances of there being sickle cell anemia and high blood pressure in Africans, and Asians get the dubious honor of having a high rate of diabetes and osteoporosis. So are you just going to ignore those genetic factors as though they were as easily transmissible as, skin color?
There's no one gene that separates one race from another.
Again, you're being slippery. There are denotative genomes. I'm sure you know about the Human Genome Project, don't you?
And in fact, the truth of the matter is that there's more genetic variety within races than there is between them.
This is a claim that I have heard over and over, usually paired with an accusation of racism for even wishing to discuss the concept of biological race and its implications to anthropology, history, genetics, medicine, etc. Certainly some aspects we currently use in the broader discussion of race in a folk sense is socially constructed. Genetically and scientifically speaking, there is no white race. Alternatively, there is no black race, and certainly no African diaspora, especially if you subscribe to the recent African origin hypothesis, which I think the mitochondrial data renders irrefutable. However, it's more about what's not being said than what is. There are some talking points that are breezed over, much in the manner that creationists reject evidence, such as how the founders effect takes place in a population whose origins all begin in Africa, with near-identical racial signifiers. We, the community, asking, aren't racists or seeking to draw nefarious conclusions from this data. We just want answers about the origin of our species and the nature of genetic diversity and the medical implications therein. Do you see this chart? This chart of mitochondrial DNA? You see this last bit here? See unknown Eurasia ? I kind of want to know what happened there, if you wouldn't mind. Remember that founders effect thing I was talking about? And the Neanderthal DNA that's inherent in every genetic population besides sub-Saharan Africans? Yeah, I kind of want answers to that. I have left some links to the voices that were quashed within their own communities, anthropology and medicine. Also, if you're wondering why this has trickled off around 2008, the last link should pretty much explain how social justice mars everything it touches.
Therefore, race is something that society defines and shapes. One example of the way that we do this is through racial stereotypes, or rather generalized qualities or tendencies assigned to groups of people.
So of course here we go from a discussion about biological race and how it's irrelevant to a discussion about stereotypes that are racist. How did we end up here, ladies and gentlemen? How did we make that leap?
So some stereotypical images would be poor women of color, particularly black women, stereotyped as the welfare queen, or that people from the Middle East are terrorists.
Or, of course, the more politically correct stereotype that this man is a racist.
Now, the problem with these and other stereotypes is that it generalizes groups of people in ways that lead to discrimination.
So now we have shifted to having a discussion entirely about the social aspects of perceivable race, instead of the genetic aspects of race, which is the only meaning of the word.
With racial stereotypes, the truth doesn't matter. It's just whether or not people believe it to be true. And stereotypes such as these are just one of the ways in which we take a person's appearance and assign meaning to their bodies.
Oh yeah, this person for sure thinks gender is 100% a social construct.
So now you might be asking yourself, okay, race is social, not biological.
And we're back. Why are you ignoring the biological aspects of race? Why is it that you insist on immediately jumping to the social ramifications of racism instead of being willing to discuss biological race? Just saying biological race ain't. That's not an argument.
Why is this an important distinction to make? One of the reasons for this is that by locating race only within the body and claiming difference on the basis of genetics, we're opening the door to justify social inequalities as natural.
Nice straw man. Does it have a name? Just curious.
Whoa, Kaylee, that's a pretty big leap in logic. Why would you say that? Well, I mean, it's not that big of a leap. If this were Frogger, I'd be splattered on the side of the road.
That joke is fundamentally broken.
But one of the reasons I say this is because it's already been done. Now, there's a lot of examples throughout history of how science was and is used as a justification for racial inequality.
I will answer this with a quote from John Etain. Branding evolution and biological race as racism is an old creationist trick dating back to Charles Darwin's time. This isn't new. You've always tried to brand this as racism. Just because once something has been used for nefarious tasks does not mean you stop studying it. This will hold back the species. You are the new creationists.
Around the time of European exploration and colonization, you know, when Europeans started discovering new continents and people,
You mean winning.
there was a growing anxiety about who was and was not considered human. Part of this anxiety had a religious basis. If they weren't human, did they have souls? Or more to the point, if they weren't human, did they have rights? Walk with me. If I'm a colonizing nation and I find that the land that I want is already inhabited by millions of people, but those people aren't human in the way that I am, and they don't have rights, then I can justify slaughtering them and taking their land. Or I can justify enslaving them. Basically, it can go a lot of ways.
So, because you reach 300 or 400 years back in history for a brief period of time where this was done, now you're just too scared. You're afraid to have this discussion. Are you afraid you might be racist? Are you afraid that you might take inference from certain datum that you would then be labeled a racist? Because that's the danger with you.
Inevitably, the question came up of whether or not God created different species of humans. This, of course, led to the question in evolutionary theory of polygenesis versus monogenesis, or rather, the question of whether humans developed in separate populations or whether we all shared one ancestor.
The answer to that, genetically speaking, is yes. Both.
Spoiler alert, we all share an ancestor.
We all share a mother. There are at least 3 fathers.
But this eventually led to the idea of the great chain of being, in which animals were on the bottom, humans were in the middle, and God stood at the top. Now, within this great chain existed different levels of humanity, arranged through a hierarchy of, you guessed it, race. And in this chain, Anglo-Saxon whiteness was considered to be closest to God.
Congratulations, you have now blocked years of scientific research on the grounds of religious argument. It's exactly what you've done without even seeming to realize that you're doing the same goddamn thing.
This hierarchy, by the way, is where we got the idea that superior races produce superior cultures, and concerns about the degradation of superior racial stock through miscegenation or race mixing.
Again, you're reaching back in history and now you're about to give some examples that are completely ridiculous to validate your claims.
Unless you believe this was all in the past and we live in some enlightened utopia where race doesn't matter, I'm sorry to tell you that this preoccupation with the boundaries of racial categories continues today. Take a look at the KKK.
Or the new Black Panthers Party.
Or different neo-Nazi organizations.
The Hebrew Israelites. The Nation of Islam. Whatever that goofy Pan-African communist organization that Black Hitler works with.
Furthermore, who belongs to these racial categories, or rather who is considered what, has shifted and continues to shift over time.
In this, you're totally correct, as the Hebrew Israelites are currently in the process of attempting to change the definition of Jew to anyone with melanin in their skin, up to and including Native Americans, Southeast Asians, South Americans, etc., etc.
For example, ethnic groups that we might consider white today, like the Irish, weren't always considered so. And something that you might find interesting, in Jim Crow era segregation, Oklahoma laws labeled Native Americans as white, while some Chinese Americans found themselves in and out of the category of whiteness depending on their location.
So now you're going to take imperial means, i.e. the relations between the English and the Irish, and by the way, the English and the Scottish right now aren't doing so great. The Scottish Nationalist Party wants white Englishmen out of Scotland. The Scottish don't consider themselves white if they're nationalists. One state's application of Jim Crow law as it applies to the very minority population of Native Americans, and the fact that the U.S. Census wasn't super great on taking care of the Chinese immigrants as a population. That's all it is. It was a U.S. Census Department. They didn't take in it into account that there were so many Asians, so they didn't bother to make a new category. None of those things have the racial implications you're trying to give them. You're being dishonest. Or you're poorly educated.
Now, there are a lot of reasons for these shifting categories, but usually it's because it serves some political or social agenda to shift the category of whiteness.
Oh, so you're going to admit that even some of those examples you gave aren't applicable to this, but then you're going to ascribe meaning to them in other examples. You're a deceitful bitch is what you are.
The opposite end of the spectrum being blackness, because when we're talking about race relations, at least in the United States, we're usually talking about it within a black and white binary.
So now, for this discussion, we've entirely abandoned the concept of genetic or biological race. And we're just going to go down the path of how race is a social construct, so let's just discuss it as it applies to racism. It's a fucking ridiculous set of arguments here.
But we'll get into that later. For now, just keep in mind that laws governing blackness also existed and have been around since colonial America.
So, you're going to say that laws that existed in one country for around 300 years affected an entire race of people. Fuck off.
Children of an interracial union were considered non-white, and a little later down the road, any presence of black ancestry within your family history meant you were labeled as black.
Anyone want to ask Trevor Noah how safe he would be back in South Africa? Anyone want to have the discussion about what the blacks in South Africa would label him? Of course not. Okay, enough of your obsession with 18th century semi-scientific principles and buzzwords. Let's get to the part where you think you're actually discussing racism for the first time in this piece, as though that weren't the main push.
This racial formation thing is important because it determines who has access to what resources and privileges and who is excluded from them. Because hey, racism, there it is.
It's not new to this. That's all you've been discussing. You left the concept of biological race behind long ago. You left any discussion about genetics long ago in the past. All you've been doing is obsessing with the relationship between quote-unquote white and quote-unquote black in America. You have no broader concept of any of this. You're navel-gazing. You're probably signaling that you're not a racist because somewhere deep down inside, once upon a time, you were scared of black people. That's probably where all this comes from. I've known many people like you, and I've seen many of you make videos like this on the internet.
So what is racism exactly? Racism can be defined as any program or practice of discrimination, segregation, persecution, or mistreatment based on membership within a race or ethnic group.
That is by far the most unnecessarily specific definition of the word racism I have ever heard in my entire life. I imagine the reason for that is you have to have it fit that category so you can use it as a weapon.
It's prejudice and discrimination, based on perceptions of racial difference and ideas of superiority and inferiority. Now, we'll be going a lot more in depth on this topic in an upcoming week, because it deserves a video of its own.
This video was 1 year ago. She has never made another video. I wonder if maybe she woke up.
For now, keep in mind that while we've talked a lot about how race is something that we've constructed ourselves, it has real-world consequences.
Here goes. It's gonna sound like a Tumblr post for a few seconds.
It's not just a way in which others try to define us, but it's a way in which we define ourselves. And despite what some people may think, ignoring race doesn't mean racism just disappears.
Even by your own definition, it indeed does mean just that, ma'am.
And we can't ignore differences just because they make us uncomfortable.
Funny you should say that. Can we study the genetic differences between the races yet, or does that still make you fucking uncomfortable?
Race is an important part of a person's identity.
Why and how, if it has no basis in reality, should it be a basis for your identity? Furthermore, one way or another, how the hell is that healthy? And should white people do this too? Should we consider whiteness a valuable part of our identity, or...?
Whether they know it or not. But that's a subject for another video. For now, I'm out of time.
What, you got your producer in your ear telling you to fucking wrap it up? Come on now.
As always, if you're interested in learning more, check out the links in the description below and feel free to ask questions in the comments. Today's question is, how does your racial identity play a role or take shape in your life? Now, my next video may look a little different because I'm defending my thesis in a few days. In it, I'll be reflecting on this project as it stands now and how it functions in a broader discussion of social issues.
Oh, I know what happened now. Let's all hope she failed to defend her thesis. This was her thesis? This project was your thesis for a master's degree. Get the fuck out of here. This was atrocious. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we get to see the failings of higher education in North America. We really need to do something about this. You know what? Fuck it. I'm signing that Sargon petition. Thanks for getting through this, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay safe out there, everyone. Good luck, and goodbye.